A highly decorated female pilot was silently reassigned to an office desk until a stunned colonel uncovered the elite combat unit she once flew with. Her record didn't speak loudly. It roared. Before we begin, if you believe quiet professionals deserve louder recognition, and if true stories of service, dignity, and justice move you, click subscribe. At Grace Stories, we bring you real narratives where silence is strength and every moment counts. Chief Warrant Officer Maya Trent stood at attention, her posture straight, her uniform pressed so precisely that even the fluorescent lights of Ridgewater Army Airfield's flight operations desk couldn't diminish her bearing. She was calm, still, prepared. She had completed every requirement for Apache helicopter transition, training ace scores on tactical assessments, perfect flight evaluations, and simulator performance that instructors quietly said surpassed most active duty pilots. Her logbook was clean, her aptitude undeniable. And yet, the folder she had handed over, the one that should have sent her to advanced rotor wing combat training, came back across the desk with a red-stamped reroute, Administrative Logistics, Monday report. No explanation, no board review, just a reassignment. Across the desk sat Lieutenant Colonel Brent Halverson, early 40s, silver wings worn dull from time rather than battle. He didn't even read her personnel file before smirking. "Let me guess," he said, flipping casually through a few front pages. "You thought playing Xbox meant you could handle real warbirds?" Maya held her salute. No reaction. He went on. "Flying Apaches requires real threat assessment, complex systems, knowledge, combat decision-making, not someone who thinks the Army is an equal opportunity flight school." Then, with a smirk and a flick of the pen, he redirected her career. "You'll report to logistics on Monday. Paperwork, planning, coordination, probably more aligned with your actual skill set." Maya didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She accepted the orders, returned a crisp salute, and walked out. Outside, the desert sun threw heat and dust across the airfield. Rows of AH-64 Apaches sat silent behind perimeter fencing, their rotor blades secured, waiting for someone worthy to fly them. Engines revved in the distance, but Maya didn't look. She didn't need to. She'd heard that sound before in darker skies, far from home, under fire. No one noticed the deep wear patterns on her combat boots, scuffed in the particular places only pilots pick up, places shaped by stepping onto steel skids and running under rotor wash. No one asked why a chief warrant officer with her experience was even in transition training to begin with, and no Halverson, not the clerk, not even the admin tech had read beyond page 3 of her file. But someone was about to. And when Colonel Jonathan Reeve, the commanding officer of the 9th Combat Aviation Brigade, opened her full record 2 days later, the air in his office went still. Because buried on page 5, under previous unit assignment, was a line that stopped him cold. Phantom Echo. The Army's most elite night mission aviation unit. No one applied. You were selected. You were tested under fire. And if you were ever dismissed, it was because you broke, and Maya never had. But 2 days before that discovery, all she had been to Lieutenant Colonel Halverson was a quiet woman in a regulation uniform with nothing to say. And he never asked. Chief Warrant Officer Maya Trent stood motionless in front of the flight operations desk at Ridgewater Army Airfield, her posture flawless. Her uniform was regulation, perfect creased, clean, and squared away. But it wasn't the appearance that stood out. It was the discipline, the kind of presence only years of field experience could shape. She had completed every requirement for Apache transition training. Her scores on technical exams were not just above average, they were perfect. Her flight evaluations were so consistent, instructors had quietly noted her as one of the most naturally gifted rotary wing pilots in her cohort. Everything in her record supported the next step: assignment to advanced Apache training with Delta Company. Instead, the packet came back across the desk with a red stamp. Rerouted Administrative Logistics. Across the desk, Lieutenant Colonel Brent Halverson barely looked up. In his early 40s, He wore a flight suit with faded aviation branch patches badges earned long ago in peacetime, when certification had more to do with hours in simulators than hours under fire. His silver pilot wings were polished, but his flight time was mostly history. He flipped Maya's personnel file open and gave the pages a casual skim, barely glancing at the content. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't ask questions. Then came the smirk. "Let me guess," he said, his voice soaked in sarcasm. "You thought playing Xbox meant you could handle real warbirds." Maya stood still. Not a blink, not a twitch, not a word. Halverson leaned back slightly and continued, his tone louder, as if projecting for an audience. "Flying Apache helicopters requires people who actually understand threat assessment, complex avionics, and real-time decision-making in combat. This isn't some equal opportunity program where anyone gets a turn because it's politically convenient." He paused and gave her a long, theatrical look, as if expecting a response. Maya offered none. Satisfied with his performance, he signed the reassignment form with a dramatic flourish and slid it across the desk toward her. "I suggest you report to the administration building first thing Monday morning," he said. "Paperwork, logistics, coordination, probably more aligned with your actual skill set." Still silent, Maya reached for the form. She accepted the document with her left hand, rendered a sharp military salute with her right, and turned to leave. She didn't explain her background. She didn't mention the unit she had served with. She didn't correct him. She simply walked away. Outside, the dry wind swept across the concrete apron, sending dust swirling past rows of Apache helicopters sitting idle behind the chain-link perimeter. Their blades were tied down, waiting for flight orders, waiting for someone worthy to pilot them. The sun was brutal, reflecting off the polished cockpit canopies. In short, sharp bursts of light flashes that reminded Maya of very different skies. Combat skies. Skies filled with muzzle flashes and infrared strobes, not sunlight and routine. As she made her way across the base, no one noticed the wear patterns on her boots, uneven scuffing from years of stepping onto metal skids and tarmac in combat zones. No one noticed that she didn't flinch when a turbine engine whined to life a few yards away, blades beginning their slow rotation. No one saw her make a subtle glance toward the sound, not in concern, but in reflex. The kind of reflex that doesn't come from flight school. It comes from surviving. Back inside the flight ops building, Lieutenant Colonel Halverson filed her reassignment into the system without a second thought. Another name, another file, another judgment made based on what was visible at the surface. He never flipped to page 4 of her record. He never saw the words, Phantom Echo, the name of the Army's most elite night operation aviation unit, the kind of unit that didn't take volunteers. You were pulled in, selected, hardened, but that wouldn't be discovered for 2 more days. For now, Maya Trent was just another soldier redirected into a desk job, and she didn't object, because she didn't need to speak. Her record would speak for her louder than any insult ever thrown across a desk. 2 days later, in a quiet office on the far side of Ridgewater Army Airfield, Colonel Jonathan Reeve, commander of the 9th Combat Aviation Brigade, settled into his end-of-week review. This was his usual Friday routine scanning personnel shifts, reassignment memos, and transfer approvals from the past 7 days. Most of it was routine. Pilots rotating in from other bases. Maintenance techs receiving orders for specialized courses. Career paths moving through the expected channels. With one hand, he sipped black coffee from a ceramic mug with chipped paint 20 years old and older than half the soldiers he commanded. With the other, he clicked through the files with quiet speed, his eyes practiced and efficient, until one line stopped him mid-sip. Trent Maya reassigned from Apache Transition Program. Previous unit, Phantom Echo. His brow furrowed. He read it again. Then he set the mug down. Captain Leah Moreno, his executive aide, noticed his sudden change in expression. She lowered her pen. "Sir, something wrong with the transfer reports?" Colonel Reeve didn't answer immediately. Instead, he clicked into the file and brought up Maya's full military service record. And as the screen loaded, he leaned back in his chair slowly, carefully reading line by line. His face shifted from curiosity to disbelief, then to something else. Quiet, respect. Phantom Echo, he muttered. Why in the world is someone from that unit being rerouted to admin? Captain Moreno stood beside his desk, following his eyes across the screen. The longer she read, the more her expression mirrored his. Chief Warrant Officer Maya Trent. 620 logged combat flight hours across multiple active zones. 2 successful emergency extractions conducted under direct enemy fire. Classified operational notes verifying coordination with JTAC teams for precision close air support during full blackout conditions. Air Medal with Valor Device. Joint Service Commendation Medal for aerial performance in sustained combat operations. Certified Tier 1 Flight Safety Designation, the highest flight worthiness classification issued by Army Aviation Command. Reeve exhaled through his nose and pushed his chair back. Who signed off on this reassignment? He asked, voice now clipped. Moreno pulled up the routing slip. That would be Lieutenant Colonel Brent Halverson, sir. Flight Ops Desk. Reeve nodded slowly, already reading the subtext. Someone skimmed the file. Someone assumed. Someone made a judgment based on surface impressions. And they nearly buried a top-tier combat pilot in office work. Reeve brought his attention back to the screen, scrolling past mission summaries and into recommendation letters from a former task force commander, another from a joint special operations aviation lead, both using language that most personnel files never see. One line stood out more than any. CW2 Trent has executed under pressure no simulator could replicate. Her decision-making saved American lives during conditions no flight manual prepares you for. Reeve straightened. His voice was quiet, but final. Get her in my office. Today. Quietly. Yes, sir. And, Captain, he added, pausing to look Moreno in the eye. Let's be clear. This isn't just a paperwork correction. This is a wake-up call. 15 minutes later, the file still open on his screen. Colonel Reeve read through Maya's combat missions again, slower this time. He recognized the coded designations. He'd been in command positions long enough to know which missions were logged as covert and which ones were scrubbed entirely. Her record included both. And yet not once did she list Phantom Echo on the first page. Not once had she mentioned her background during reassignment processing. Because she didn't need to. She let the system do what it did. Let the assumptions play out. But that silence wasn't passivity, it was principle. And it told Reeve more about her than any resume ever could. Maya Trent stood in the hallway outside the office of Colonel Jonathan Reeve, her posture flawless, hands behind her back, expression composed. She had stood like this before in combat zones, outside briefing tents, before commanders who held more than her future in their hands. But today wasn't war. This was stateside, safe, administrative. And yet, she could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. The wooden door opened. Captain Leah Moreno, the colonel's aide, gave a professional nod. Chief Trent, the colonel will see you now. Maya stepped into the room with the precision of someone trained to make an impression without saying a word. The office was spacious, quiet, and lined with plaques, commendations, and framed photos decades of aviation history etched into the walls. But what caught her attention was what wasn't there. Colonel Reeve wasn't behind his desk. He was standing. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. Please, Chief, have a seat. Maya nodded once and sat, waiting silently as the colonel took his placenaut behind the desk, but beside it, resting his arm lightly on the edge. The gesture wasn't casual, it was respectful, equalizing. I've just completed a full review of your file, Reeve began, specifically your previous unit assignment. Maya gave a single firm nod. Yes, sir. I'd like to understand something, he continued, his tone professional but genuinely inquisitive. When Lieutenant Colonel Halverson reassigned you from flight training to logistics duty, why didn't you provide clarification or advocate for yourself? Maya answered without hesitation. Because I wasn't asked, sir. He made his decision based on what he chose to see. Reeve studied her face carefully. She didn't seem bitter. She didn't seem defensive. She was calm, direct, entirely composed. He opened the manila folder beside him and flipped to the second page, though he already knew what was there. You logged 620 combat flight hours, he said aloud, confirming what he had read earlier. Executed 2 successful extraction missions under active fire, coordinated JTAC support in blackout conditions. Yes, sir, Maya confirmed quietly. Decorated with the Air Medal with Valor and the Joint Service Commendation Medal, he added. Yes, sir. He closed the folder and leaned back slightly. You've flown missions more dangerous than most of my pilots will see in their entire careers. So tell me, why were you enrolled in Apache transition training to begin with? Maya paused. Her voice remained measured, but there was something in her eyes now, something personal. Because it wasn't about proving I could fly Apaches, she said. It was about proving that I still wanted to. Reeve let the silence hang a moment, absorbing the weight of what she had just said. For combat pilots, reintegration wasn't a checklist, it was a test of will. After experiencing the extremes of special operations aviation, transitioning back to standard Army flight units could feel like a loss of purpose. Maya hadn't come to prove she was capable. She had come to prove she was still committed. The officer who processed your transfer, Reeve said carefully, made a decision based on incomplete information and assumptions. Maya nodded once, her tone neutral. That's not uncommon in my experience, sir. He reached for a new folder, this one crisp, unsigned, and already filled out. You are not reporting to administrative logistics, he said firmly. She looked up for the first time with genuine interest. You'll be assigned to Delta Company, 1st Battalion, Apache Attack Helicopter Unit effective immediately. All paperwork has been processed through the correct channels. Maya straightened slightly, her voice still steady. Understood, sir. Before she could rise, Reeve asked, Is there anything else I should know that might impact your assignment background preferences, mission history, operating conditions? Maya hesitated just a beat, then, almost too quietly, Only that I perform best during night flight operations, sir. Reeve smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but recognition. I would expect nothing less from someone who served with Phantom Echo. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. As Maya prepared to stand, Reeve spoke one last time. For what it's worth, Chief, I've reviewed the service records of every pilot currently assigned to this brigade. Your qualifications and combat record exceed those of officers who outrank you by multiple grades. Maya paused, then offered, Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. Lieutenant Colonel Halverson's mistake, she said, gave me clarity on the importance of ensuring that decision-makers operate with complete and accurate information, especially when those decisions impact operational readiness. Reeve heard it for what it was. A diplomatic statement on institutional prejudice, delivered without complaint, without accusation, and without compromise. Dismissed, Chief Trent, he said, and welcome to Delta Company. Within a week, Maya was back where she belonged. Not behind a desk, not sitting in briefings, in the air. She began with flight simulator-style drills, precision maneuvers, blackout scenarios. Then came cold engine starts. Then pre-flight procedures, maintenance diagnostics, mission prep. Every step was exact, not flashy, not performative, just flawless. Her crew chief, a young specialist named Kyle Rudd, met her during final inspection before her first night exercise. He looked over her flight gear, then gave her a skeptical glance. With all due respect, ma'am, you sure you're not just here to meet some kind of diversity metric? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, she landed an AH-64, in full darkness, with no radar assist, in a crosswind that had grounded half the company. She touched down clean center pad, zero drift, silent. From that moment forward, no one questioned why Maya Trent was there. Because now, everyone knew. The first thing Maya Trent did was return to the simulator. Not because she had Tobit, because she chose to. She knew that trust in aviation wasn't earned by medals or rank. It was earned in how you handled a checklist, how you responded to a malfunction, how precisely you hovered at 3 feet above a hot landing zone, with 2 wounded soldiers strapped in the back. She didn't speak much. She didn't share stories. She just went back to the beginning pre-flight checks, cold starts, system calibrations, no shortcuts, no assumptions. On her second day at Delta Company, she was assigned to Specialist Kyle Rudd, a young but overconfident maintenance tech. He'd only been on the flight line for a few months, but already carried the cocky energy of someone convinced he'd seen enough to judge others. When he saw Maya approaching the AH-64 Apache scheduled for night flight certification, he muttered just loud enough to be heard. "With all due respect, ma'am, are you sure you're not just here to meet a diversity metric?" Maya didn't blink. She didn't stop walking. She didn't even glance in his direction. She went straight to the aircraft and began her inspection. Exhaust ports, blade track, pitch linkages, fuel levels all by hand, all in silence. Specialist Rudd smirked, half expecting her to call him out. She never did. That night, the air over Ridgewater was rough. The wind cut crosswise across the tarmac at nearly 25 knots. Cloud cover rolled in heavy and low. 2 scheduled flights were grounded for safety. The flight control tower issued a formal advisory. Simulator use recommended, real-world flights discouraged, unless for urgent readiness requirements. Maya Trent requested live flight clearance anyway. She had to complete a specific evaluation. Night landing, no radar assist, under crosswind conditions. By 2,300 hours, she was up. Delta Company's flight crew gathered near the tower windows, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. Even pilots who had hundreds of hours under their belt looked up into the black sky and shook their heads. "She's gonna wave off," one said. But Maya didn't wave off. She came in low, controlled, quiet, through pure dead reckoning and instrumentationo radar, no GPS overlays. She brought the Apache across the final approach at a steady descent angle. Her descent profile was textbook, but her flair was what froze the crowd. In a gusting crosswind, she rotated clean, reduced speed and brought the aircraft to a stop on pad 6. Dead center, 0 drift, no bounce. Her skids touched pavement like a leaf, not a machine weighing over 0 pounds. From behind the glass, Specialist Rudd said nothing. Nobody did. The flight officer on duty simply muttered, "That's the cleanest blackout landing I've seen in 5 years." By morning, word had spread. 2 days later, Captain Jared Lancer, one of Delta's most senior Apache pilots, submitted a flight request. He listed Maya Trent as his co-pilot. The day after that, another request came in from a pilot who had once scoffed at transition cases. By the end of the week, her name had appeared on 4 separate voluntary crew requests, all from officers who outranked her. Not because they were told to. Not because of politics. Because she was better. In the maintenance bay, Specialist Rudd approached her quietly during a post-flight inspection. "Ma'am," he said, avoiding her eyes, "I didn't know. About your background." Maya didn't look up from the panel she was checking. "You still don't," she replied flatly. "But you saw what matters." He nodded once and left. That was the last time he ever questioned why she was there. Colonel Reeve received 3 unsolicited commendations about Maya's performance that week. One was from the instructor who had been on standby during her landing exercise. "She didn't just meet the standard," the note read. "She reminded us what the standard actually is." Reeve didn't file the notes. He pinned them to the corner of his bulletin board under one word: awareness. Because what happened that week wasn't just a correction. It was a reminder to everyone in the unit that ability is not always loud. That some pilots don't arrive with stories. They arrive with records, discipline, and results. Maya Trent never spoke of Phantom Echo. Not once. She never dropped hints. never wore the old patch, never referred to combat missions in distant places. She didn't flash medals, mention operations, or name-drop commanders. But those who had seen real combat recognized the signs anyway. They noticed how she walked around the Apache, never rushing, never casual, always with awareness. They noticed that she didn't just check flight panels, she scanned perimeters. Her eyes instinctively tracked exits, fallback paths, blind corners, like someone who had landed under fire and didn't plan to be caught unaware again. She never paused to admire the aircraft. She studied it, trusted it, like it had once saved her life. That's when they started to wonder. One morning, a handwritten note appeared on the company bulletin board, taped just above the daily training roster. No signature, no author, just 10 plain words in block lettering. Don't ask where she came from, just try to keep up with where she's going. By noon, nearly every pilot had seen it. Nobody said a word, but the tone on the flight line shifted. Quietly, subtly, respectfully. Maya wasn't spoken to with forced formality anymore. She was spoken to with intent, like someone whose time mattered, like someone whose knowledge had weight. Younger pilots began to sit near her during briefings, hoping to catch her pre-flight notes. One even asked, tentatively, if she could review his emergency procedure checklist. She didn't lecture. She didn't correct. She just said, "I'll fly it with you next week." Word got around again. After a night training run-on that involved low-altitude navigation through simulated blackout airspace, Colonel Jonathan Reeve caught Maya on the flight line during equipment checks. The others had gone in. She stayed to run a final systems test on her bird. "Chief Trent," he called, stepping into the glow of the maintenance bay light. She stood from the left side of the cockpit, wiping oil from her gloves. "Sir, you've made quite an impression on the unit." She didn't react. "I've only maintained standard operating procedures, sir." Reeve nodded, hands behind his back. "Exactly. And that standard appears to be considerably higher than what most people expected." Maya glanced at him just briefly. "The most dangerous assumption in aviation, sir, is thinking you know someone based on incomplete information." He gave a short, respectful nod. "That assumption's grounded more pilots than engine failure ever has." She secured the final panel and stepped back. "Then let's make sure that assumption doesn't fly again." Back in the ready room, a junior pilot named Torres sat reviewing his simulator footage. He paused when Maya walked in. Everyone in the room looked up just for a moment, but Maya said nothing. She simply sat, opened her notebook, and started logging maintenance intervals from the last flight. That's when Torres got up and walked over. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "next time you run blackout landings, if you ever need a co-pilot." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Maya looked up. "Be ready on Wednesday," she said. "Wheels up at 2000. Torres nodded like he'd just been handed a mission assignment from a general. There were no announcements, no ceremonies, no internal memos about Maya's background. But by the end of that week, no one asked where she came from anymore. They were just trying to keep up with where she was going. There was no memo, no reprimand, no disciplinary meeting. But Lieutenant Colonel Brent Halverson's name quietly appeared on the next internal review cycle for command judgment and personnel routing. It wasn't framed as punishment. That's not how the Army handled these things, not when the error wasn't criminal, just deeply revealing. No formal charges, no headlines, but those above him took note. Because reassigning a Tier 1 certified combat pilot to a paperwork desk without reading beyond page 3 of her record wasn't just administrative sloppiness. It was systemic blindness. And that kind of blindness had a cost. Colonel Jonathan Reeve knew it. He stood at his office window one evening, hands behind his back, watching the dusk settle over Ridgewater's flight line. The red-orange glow of sunset bounced off the helicopter bays. Apaches lined the tarmac like sleeping giants still, powerful, waiting. Somewhere among them, Maya Trent was logging post-flight notes. She had just returned from another blackout sim run with 2 junior pilots. They asked for her, volunteered. Not because of her past, but because of her present. Reeve didn't need to monitor her anymore. Her reputation had grown, not by story but by example. He turned from the window and looked again at her personnel file, still open on his desk. 620 combat hours. Multiple extraction missions. Valor medals. Flawless judgment. No complaints filed. No awards requested. No excuses made. She had every right to raise hell when Halverson dismissed her. Instead, she let her record speak. And when that wasn't enough, she let her performance finish the sentence. Reeve shook his head slowly. His brigade had come inches from losing one of the best pilots he'd seen in 20 years. And why? Because someone made the most dangerous assumption in military leadership. They thought they already knew who someone was without looking. Across base, Maya sat alone in the hangar, helmet on the bench beside her, flight gloves tucked into the side pocket of her bag, a notepad on her knee, where she was quietly sketching approach angles from that night's run. No cameras, no applause, just habits. Repetition, analysis, precision. She heard footsteps and looked up. Captain Leah Moreno stood at a distance, nodding slightly. "He wanted you to know," she said, "that the review board saw your name listed as recommended flight lead. He didn't put it there. The other pilots did." Maya didn't respond right away. Finally, she nodded once. "Understood." Captain Moreno lingered for a second, then added, "It's not often someone changes a flight culture in 2 weeks." "I didn't come to change anything," Maya replied. "I came to fly." By the end of the month, she was mentoring 2 junior warrant officers. By the end of the quarter, she had authored a revised night-flying checklist that was quietly adopted across Delta Company. No announcement was made, but the checklist had her initials in the bottom corner, MT, and that was enough. The change didn't come in bold moves. It came in habits, in standards raised, in questions asked differently. When new pilots joined the unit, older ones would nudge them during the first briefing and whisper, "Watch how she moves. Don't ask why, just watch." The new ones didn't know what Phantom Echo was. They didn't need to. What mattered was who she was here. Now. Every day. 1 year later, Colonel Reeve would hand her a folded letter with her next assignment, a classified forward, operations planning team for high-risk insertions. No fanfare, just a nod. She accepted it the way she had accepted everything else. Quietly. Completely. Professionally. Because Maya Trent didn't need to prove anything. She already had. Life reflection from Grace Stories. Closing segment. Approx. 200 words. What Maya Trent's story reminds us is that true strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it stands quietly, does the job, and lets results speak for themselves. In a world that too often rewards loudness over substance, Maya shows us the enduring value of humility, consistency, and earned respect. She didn't demand validation. She proved her worth through discipline, focus, and performance. And when she was dismissed unfairly, she didn't fight back with anger. She answered with excellence. For those of us who've been overlooked, underestimated, or judged too quickly, this story is a reminder. Your value isn't diminished by someone else's failure to see it. The truth always finds a way to surface, especially when it's carried with quiet dignity. If this story meant something to you, we invite you to subscribe to Grace Stories. Every week, we bring you true stories of service, justice, and quiet courageousries that stay with you long after they're told. Thank you for watching, and from all of us at Grace Stories, we wish you peace, strength, and continued purpose. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.